Welcome back. Let's now take a look at the day's business news with William Edwards. Hello again, William.
Hi, Claire.
So, of course, another big day for the Eurozone. We've got leaders gathering in Brussels, and at the heart of it all is the European Central Bank.
Exactly. Before the summit kicks off in Brussels this evening, we're going to be hearing from the ECB. First off, they're expected to cut interest rates today. Of course, they started hiking interest rates back up a few months ago at the first signs of inflation, but it became rapidly clear that, in fact, growth was really the priority. Growth has slumped in the Eurozone, and those interest rate hikes really haven't helped. So they're expected to continue to bring those back down again. But perhaps more interesting today is the ECB's involvement in plans to save the euro. Today we're expecting also to hear that they're extending their credit lines to the banks to bolster confidence in that sector, and they could even have a broader role in buying up government debt to bring stability to countries like Spain and Italy, for example. To talk about this now, we're joined by our business editor, Owen Fairclough, who is in Frankfurt at the European Central Bank, keeping an eye on all of these developments. Thanks very much for joining us, Owen. Good morning. First off, Owen, could you walk us through what exactly are we expecting to see as far as measures on the banking sector go today from the European Central Bank?
Well, good morning, both. And the ECB today is perhaps getting back to what it does best and perhaps what is its most natural and indeed its actual mandate, that is being a banker's bank. There's talk and reports that the ECB will implement a range of measures, perhaps extending credit lines to banks. Currently, most banks can tap into the ECB for around about a year's worth of lending. There's talk about doubling that, maybe even tripling that. That would give banks longer-term liquidity, and the hope is that would trickle down to mortgage owners and, of course, to businesses who depend on their banks for credit. The problem we have is we are in something of a credit crunch right now. European banks not lending to each other, US banks not being prepared to lend to euros. This is all about trying to give the banks a little bit of a break. It's perhaps ominous that here in Frankfurt we're just a stone's throw away from Commerzbank, the headquarters of Commerzbank, one of Germany's biggest banks, that's had to have an emergency recapitalization plan. Even German banks right now are suffering. They're supposedly some of those rock solid in the world.
Owen, what about the possibility that the ECB could take broader action, not just for the banking sector, but for troubled Eurozone nations?
Well, this is the big bazooka moment, Claire, and certainly, poor old Mario Draghi, the new president of the European Central Bank, seems to be being baited by various European leaders at the moment. The latest, the head of the OECD, who pretty much laid down the gauntlet and said, where is the bazooka? This is, of course, asking the ECB to be the ultimate lender of last resort. And the stakes are high now. There's even reports circulating that Standard & Poor's, having threatened to downgrade individual Eurozone countries, may even go the whole hog and downgrade the EU as a body. And that pretty much leaves the European Central Bank as the only golden player left in the game, the only triple-rated institution that's capable of rescue the whole of the Eurozone. The problem is that is not the ECB's job. It's wandered off its mandate a little bit in recent months by buying up the bonds of countries like Spain and Italy. It really wants to get back to doing what it normally does, i.e. helping out banks, and yet it's under massive pressure right now to try and rescue these countries. Mario Draghi has given hints that he's prepared to do that if he knows that there's going to be a little bit more fiscal union, a little bit more budgetary discipline among these EU countries. So we're expected to hear a little bit more from Draghi at his news conference later this Thursday afternoon.
Owen Fairclough reporting from Frankfurt. Thank you very much. Now, in another sign of continuing Eurozone worries, France has received a downgrade, William.
That's right, although it's not quite as bad as it sounds. This is an interesting story. The Dagong Ratings Agency is a Chinese agency, which, not one of the major players, but they have put France down to A+ from AA-. Now, that does sound like very worrying news. We've been talking a lot. There are a lot of worries at the moment about France's AAA status, of course, with the major ratings agencies such as Standard & Poor's and Moody's. But this is the Chinese take on things. I suppose reassuringly for France, it's now at the same level, according to Dagong at least, as the United States, which continues to borrow at very, very low levels despite its issues earlier this year. So perhaps not all that bad. But as Owen made reference to just now, the EU is under watch by Standard & Poor's for its credit rating. So there are continuing worries. Despite this not being a major issue, this particular decision, there are continuing worries about Eurozone creditworthiness.
Okay, so maybe we shouldn't be too worried about that move by de Gong, but what about the fact that it's being reported that Eurozone nations are making contingency plans for the end of the euro?
Well, we've heard a lot about individual companies making plans this week for potential Eurozone meltdown, I suppose you could call it. And there is an interesting report in the Wall Street Journal today which goes through the contingency plans by central banks they're reporting on. They're saying that Ireland is considering its needs when it comes to printing presses, somewhat worryingly. I mean, this is, like I say, reported. And, of course, these contingency plans are something that banks always and governments always have to make. And no one can really rule out the end of the euro at the moment, of course. So while this does sound rather alarmist, this is part of rather standard contingency plans, but still rather worrying nonetheless.
And the markets, what are they making of all of this?
Well, they are waiting, I suppose, for this Eurozone summit. Let's have a look at how things are playing in Asia at the moment, all down there on the ahead of any news coming out of Europe, but not hugely optimistic, it would seem, at the moment.
Okay, moving over now to North America, where there's tension over a proposed oil pipeline project. The Keystone XL pipeline could send oil from Canada's tar sands all the way to Texas, but construction has been put on hold by President Obama, who says a review is needed due to environmental concerns.
Canada has hundreds of billions of barrels of oil in the form of tar sands. A proposed pipeline called Keystone XL will take extracted oil to the Gulf of Mexico. Opponents say the project threatens ecologically fragile areas. Supporters say it means jobs. The US President, meeting Canadian Prime Minister Stephen Harper, says he won't be rushed into a decision.
This is a big project with big consequences. It is my job as President of the United States to make sure that a process is followed that examines all the options, looks at all the consequences before a decision is made.
Republicans say Obama is delaying Keystone XL to avoid a confrontation with environmentalists. House Speaker John Boehner wants a ruling now and proposes tying it into legislation for a middle-class tax cut Obama dearly wants. A showdown on the oil pipeline project is in the offing.
Any effort to try to tie Keystone to the payroll tax cut, I will reject.
The tussle on the Hill follows a move by the White House last month to delay a ruling on Keystone XL until 2013. That is after next November's election. The pipeline and the politics overshadowed key Canada-US talks, which saw significant agreement on border security and trade.
And finally, which is the most expensive city in the world for expats?
It's Tokyo in at number one. We saw a tussle perhaps in the top 10 between Japan and Switzerland. Both of those countries managed to get 4 in the top 10, with Norway getting in 2 entries there, Oslo in at number 2. You can see that Paris managed to sneak in at number 20. Cities including London and New York didn't even make it onto the list, but Sydney and Moscow were up there in the top 20. This is according to ECA International. What it's based on is a basket of consumer goods, such as everyday products, basically clothing, food, that sort of thing. It leaves out big ticket purchases like accommodation and buying a car, for instance, but gives you a general idea. Things are pretty expensive over in Tokyo, at least.
Okay, well, we're very happy to be here in Paris. Thank you very much, William. That's it for business. That's it from me. Do stay tuned. Stuart Norval will have all the latest headlines in a couple of minutes.
It was one of the biggest strikes that Britain's ever seen, people coming out in an unprecedented scale to protest budget cuts to public service pensions. Faced with an ongoing financial crisis, the UK is implementing a drastic austerity programme. We went to Newcastle in the north of England, where 1 in 3 workers is a civil servant. In this city already hard hit by unemployment, we met locals who are steeling themselves for even harder times ahead. Don't miss Reporters, Thursday, 9:45 p.m. Paris time on France 24.
Join us in Serbia for this new edition of Europe District. Together we'll assess the country's progress towards the EU. We'll ask the President of Serbia, Boris Tadic, whether he's ready to resume talks with Kosovo. We'll tell you why biological agriculture could save the country's ailing farming sector. And we'll visit the city of Belgrade with the star of Serbian cinema, Miki Manojlovic. He played the leading role in the '95 blockbuster Underground.
Don't miss Europe District, today, 11:10 a.m. Paris time on France 24.